to the shop. And for those of you new here, I'm Brad, and this is Sabot Woodworks. Today I want to upgrade some of my tools, and in this case it's going to be my chisel set. I do have some older chisels that I inherited. These are EA Berg chisels. Apparently they're pretty nice. They're a little older. I could clean them up, but I didn't want to abuse them too much. And I did want to sort of get a more expansive set of chisels to cover off a lot of the in-between sizes that I was missing. So I ended up purchasing through Lee Valley these Narex chisels. They're standard entry-level chisels. I've sharpened them, I've flattened the backs up, and I've used them, and I'm quite happy with how they're performing for me. My big complaint is the handle. I don't like it. It's kind of oval-shaped. It doesn't really sit well in the hand, and I don't really enjoy the way the handle's shaped. So what I'm planning on doing is we're going to pop these completely off, and I'm going to spin my own handles, and I'm going to replace them. So that's going to be sort of today's project, and maybe for the next day or two as I go along. I do have, as you can see here, a mortise chisel from Lee Nielsen. It's a 1/2 inch. Still got the protective wax on it. So obviously I haven't been doing a lot of mortises. But I do like the way it feels. I feel the handle's a little bit small. I'd probably put a bit of a bigger lip here just for my finger and thumb as I'm pairing with my other chisels. But for the most part, I do kind of like the shape of this. The EA Berg chisels, they're not bad. They kind of got a bit of a bigger lip, but I don't like how the back part sits in the hand. So I'm going to kind of make a hybrid between these two. And I'm going to replace all my chisel handles. Ultimately, probably going to go with hard maple. I want them to stand up to a little bit of abuse, and it's just a little harder on the Janka scale compared to walnut, if you may, or cherry. So that's my intent. So let's get these chisel handles knocked off, and then I'll grab a bunch of maple that I got laying around the shop, cut things down to size, and we'll chuck them up on the lathe to see if we can't turn some handles. All right, let's go have some fun.
Okay, so today our plan is to replace our Narex chisel handles. So I've already determined that this handle is too long. It doesn't fit well in my hand. So maybe if I come to about here before the rear ferrule, I think that might be a good size. I like the little angled notch right here, but this is too shallow, and this is kind of oval shaped instead of round, and I don't like that. It doesn't really feel good in my hand, so I'm going to make my handle round. And the rough design is, so I'm going to have roughly about my ferrule here, so that's where that's going to go. And then I kind of want it to come out a little bit, and maybe I'll just put some little lines here just for some decoration. And then I'm going to want it to sort of come down a little and come back out and curve around the back and then come back in. Obviously my art skills are great, and this is not the scale, but this is roughly what I want. And here is going to be about 33 millimeters. The width here is going to be about 25 millimeters, and the distance from here to that curve is going to be about 25 millimeters, and then from the curve to the end is going to be 85 millimeters. And then I'm thinking just before where this curve is going to be, so it's going to probably sit in where the width is going to be for 33 millimeters. I think I'm going to have that at about, we'll call that 80 millimeters. I think that should be fine. Oh yeah, and don't forget, this is top secret. This way people can't steal your plans. And but actually, if anybody is interested in this, honestly, this is just my rough idea right now, and then I'm going to refine things as I go on the actual lathe, and then we'll see how it turns out. So, now that I've got a rough idea of what it's going to look like, let's go see if I can turn this.
So one thing I did before taking my chisels apart
was wrap the edges in painter's tape. And I did this for a couple reasons. One, to make sure I don't accidentally cut myself because these are fairly sharp. And two, in the event that while I'm taking the chisels apart, I drop the actual chisel portion on the ground, hopefully this will avoid any chipping or damage to the actual cutting blade itself. So removing the handles itself is pretty simple. I clamped it into my vise, and then using a scrap piece of maple and my large mallet, I smacked the handle off by hitting the maple against the edge of the ferrule next to where the blade actually connects. This allowed me control, and I didn't damage anything. And it just, after a couple good hits, the handle would just pop right off, and then I'd rinse and repeat and carry on with the next one. And this is one of the reasons why I use the painter's tape, because on one of the chisels, as I was hammering it out, the blade tilted out a little bit and my fingers brushed against where the actual cutting surface would have been. However, the painter's tape saved my fingers from getting cut. And like all good projects, because I purchased my lumber from the lumber yard in a rough state, I take it over to the jointer, which is an absolute powerhouse in my shop, to get one edge flat and then the corresponding 90-degree angle flat before taking it over to my planer. And then the next step was over to the planer, where I flattened the top surface parallel to the bottom, and then brought it down to its final thickness of 2 inches. So this way I'll have uniform thickness across all the blanks for my chisel handles. And the last step in the milling process was bringing it over to the table saw, where I cut it down into 2-inch thick strips. So that will give me 2-inch by 2-inch blocks for the blanks to make the chisel handles out of over at the lathe. And once I was done over at the table saw, I brought the blanks to my workbench and I began marking out 15 centimeter increments for the overall length of the individual chisel handle blanks. One thing to keep in mind is when bringing this over to your miter saw to account for the kerf thickness of your blade. So this way your last blank isn't going to be significantly shorter than the others due to the wood lost when you're making the individual cuts. And with a quick trip over to the miter saw, I had my 9 blanks cut out in record time.
Alright, so I've got all the chisels disassembled and I've got their associated blanks all cut out. They're about just a hair under 2-inch by 2-inch and they're about 15 centimeters long. This way I got a little bit of room to play with. So as I have it up on the lathe, I'll be able to feel for size. If I need to shrink it down a little bit, I can do that. Because you can always take wood off, but you can't put wood back on. At least not with turning anyway. It doesn't work very well that way. But yeah, so we'll get these marked center. And then we'll take them over to the lathe and we'll start spinning them around. Let's go have some fun.
So before taking the blanks over to the lathe, I made sure that I found center on both ends, and then I took an awl and made a corresponding indent at the line intersection. This way it was fairly speedy for me to line up and place the blanks on the lathe between my drive spur and the tail stock itself. Okay, so off camera, I just decided to spin a proof of concept handle for my chisel, and this is ultimately what I came up with. And we'll just focus that a little bit for you. There we go. So this is what I came up with. So it's about 33 millimeters in diameter back here, and 25 up here at the lip. and it's got a nice little spot for my thumb, and it sits nicely within the palm of my hand, so I feel like I have a lot more control over the chisel when pairing with my chisel now. Whereas in comparison, if I hold the old Narex one, and if I had my thumb in the same place, it's now sticking out past here, coming down towards my wrist, and I don't really feel like I have a whole lot of control over it, so I'm quite happy with that. I'm not going to transfer the rear ferrule over. If I need to, I can respin handles and I can add one to the back later, but for the finer purpose that I'm doing, this should be fine, and overall I'm very happy with how that turned out. So I'm going to get the rest of them spun up, and then we'll look to add a little bit of finish on them and start assembling. And I'll give my chisels a bit of a sharpen while I have the handles off, just to make my life a little bit easier. All right, let's get to it. So I forget who said it, but I remember hearing at one point that there's no mistakes in wood turning, only design changes. And yeah, that's true in this case as well. So this is the original Narex handle. And then I've got the first iteration that I made off camera, and then I tried to replicate that with this one, but I ended up making the end a little too sort of pointed. I didn't like it, but I did like how flat it was on the top of this one in comparison to, if we turn this one sideways, in comparison to this one where it's a little more bulbous up at the top. So I feel like I like the curve here with a little bit of a flatter portion. So third time's the charm, and I should be able to start turning the handles here in a second. Okay, let's go try this again. So as I'm getting the first blank chucked up on the lathe, one thing that I forgot to mention earlier when I was taking apart the chisel handles was after I disassembled them and placed them back on my bench, I kept the chisel, the handle, and the ferrule all together as one integral component, simply because I found that when I was taking some measurements for the ferrules with the different handles, there were variations. So I kept all like components together. So if I was working on my 3/8 inch chisel, I took all the components over to the lathe, and I would measure the ferrule proper for that chisel and custom make the size of the handle for to receive that. And then once that was done, it was easy to put back together and then move on to the next one, and everything went together perfectly at the end. These small chisel handles were actually a joy to make. They were pretty fun. They were pretty quick to turn around on the lathe itself. And then once I had it round, I then took my ruler and then I started marking out the dimensions that I had sketched up on my notepad earlier. And then from there, I began turning the rest of the chisel handle and its final form. So as you can see here, I'd use my calipers and reference the original handle thickness for the ferrule portion itself. That way I knew that I was going to have that fit perfectly. As I mentioned before, the ferrule sizes, there were slight variations, so I decided instead of trying to do a blanket size, I just measured each individual original handle and then cut the corresponding insert for the ferrule itself. And overall that went pretty well. And I had a little bit of wood left over in the blank so that if for whatever reason I cut it too small or I needed to start over, I didn't need to completely start over on a new blank. I could just shift my overall measurements back and still be able to turn the handle. So once I was happy with the fit of the ferrule on the blank of the chisel handle, what I then did was take my proof of concept handle and I took the calipers and began to measure that to ensure that I had the proper sizing for the individual components that's going to make up the chisel handle. One thing I could have done was make a storyboard. However, that honestly slipped my mind and I just decided to go off of the actual proof of concept one that I had, and I was happy with that. So that was my reference throughout the entire project. and honestly that worked out fine for me. The remainder of the carve for the chisel handles were pretty simple. The big thing for me was just making sure that I had the ferrules all nice and snug, and then just copying off of my proof of concept chisel handle was simple, and each one came out beautifully. And for the last little bit of this chisel carve, I'll just let you listen to some nice smooth music, and then we'll talk about the next steps once we get there. And with that, it was just a final cleanup of the end of the chisel handle, a gentle sanding, and then I was able to take it to the chuck and rinse and repeat for another 8 handles. And now that all the handles are complete, I took them over to the finishing bench and applied a coat of Danish oil on it, keeping in mind not to mix up the order of the chisel handles because I had them laid out corresponding to the various sizes and ferrules, as I mentioned earlier in the video. As I began to assemble the handles onto the chisels, one thing I did was once I installed the ferrules, I put a little bit of painter's tape just to hold it in place. They were fairly snug, but I found that as I would hit them with the handle, sometimes they would come loose. And when I was doing my proof of concept, one got a little stuck between the handle and the chisel itself. Luckily, I noticed it and pulled it apart before I did any significant damage. But overall, the process worked, and the chisels went together quite nicely. With a few persuasive taps of my gigantic hammer that I replaced a little while ago, but I'm glad I kept, the chisel handles went on, and just like that, the first one was done.
Alright everybody, so this concludes my project for upgrading my Narex chisel handles. Overall, I'm impressed with how they turned out. They just feel wonderful in the hand. They're nice, comfortable, and I custom made them for me, so I really can't complain. And if I do, I have no one to blame but myself. These handles are a vast improvement over the original handles that came on them. So these handles are the ones that come on the entry-level Narex chisel sets. They do have their higher end and premium lines. I've never held one of those, so I don't know what those handles are like, to be honest. This is just what I know. And the chisels themselves, they work great for me. For everything that I'm doing, I've had no issues with them. My only complaint were the handles. I don't know what Shrek-handed individual held these and said that this is a good idea, but they just don't feel good in the hand. They're rough, they're kind of like oval shaped. They don't really have much of a spot for your thumb to sort of hook in there, and they're just big. So especially if you have smaller hands, you're not going to like these handles. And that's why I kind of decided that I wanted to change up the handles that were on my chisels. I'd seen a few videos out there, and I felt confident enough that, you know what, I can try this. So I knocked off all the chisel handles, I got some maple blanks, and I went over to the lathe. As you saw earlier in the video, this is the first iteration that I made. And overall, it was fine. It was a little too bulbous up on the top. I didn't really like that. So I spun another one, and it was a little too flat on it. So I kind of put the two together for my third iteration, and then that's what came out on these chisel handles. And honestly, they feel fantastic. For those of you that are going to be spinning your own or creating your own chisel handles for the Narex, you don't necessarily have to have a lathe for that. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. These ones are tang ones, so they do have a metal tail end that inserts into the handle versus like a socket chisel. And so I found out the hole is, if you're drilling 3/8, it's going to be too big of a hole. The chisel's going to flop around. 5/16 is too small, and I found that out by doing a test drill when 3/8 was too big. I drilled the 5/16 hole, tried to hammer it in, and it just blew the block apart. So 5/16 was out. The size that I ended up going for, and it seems to be a perfect fit, is 23/64. So if you're going to drill out some holes for your own Narex chisel handles, 23/64 is the way to go. I opted to drill the hole out on my lathe instead of my drill press, simply due to the fact that the center on my tailstock, it's not one of those pointed ones that come all the way out. This one's kind of recessed in. So if I drilled the holes out ahead of time, it would have gone into the wood, and the wood would have flopped around, and it would have been very conducive to keeping everything round and steady on the lathe. So I used my lathe chuck and put the drill bit in, and then once I had everything round and centered, I used the tailstock to help drill out the hole, and honestly that worked fine for me. So you can use your drill press or a chuck on your lathe. The only thing is that I was limited with the tailstock heads that I had, so doing it all on the lathe was the better option for me. So overall, honestly, I'm really happy with this. If anybody is looking to make their own chisel handles, might be a good excuse to go get a lathe if you don't have one. Lathes are a lot of fun. And for anybody that is actually, looking to upgrade their handles and they have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more, please hit that subscribe button and help me grow my channel a little bit. I'd like to do this for fun. I don't really have any weekly set upload schedule. It's just when I find time amongst the real world, I like to get into the shop and make some projects, upgrade some tools, or restore some old vintage tools. And yeah, so you never really know what video is going to come out next. And yeah, so I appreciate everybody stopping by and watching this video. And I can't wait to see you all in the next one. All right, have a great one. Cheers, everybody.